Do you ever watch a movie and think, how did they ever dream this one up? Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. As part of my coverage of the 2023 Toronto International Film Festival, today I'm going to be talking about the 2023 dark comedy fantasy Dream Scenario, which will release in theaters on November 10th. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content, like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Dream Scenario stars Nicolas Cage, Julianne Nicholson, and Cera, and was directed by Kristoffer Borgli. It tells the story of ordinary biology professor Paul Matthews, played by Nicolas Cage, who suddenly and inexplicably begins appearing in the dreams of people from around the world. First-time watches can be a curious thing. Sometimes you go into a film absolutely blind, knowing nothing about it, therefore having no expectations. But more often than not, you go into that first viewing with some sort of expectation. Maybe you watched the trailer, or read the logline or a little premise blurb, maybe you read a review, or have heard things from your friends, or maybe you're just familiar with the director or actor's typical work. There's likely something that set the stage for what you expect the film to be. Sometimes these expectations end up being reality, and sometimes not, but far less often does a film fit into both of those categories simultaneously. I saw Dream Scenario at TIFF, so there was no trailer, no reviews, just a little premise blurb and cast and crew information to go on. But with this film being an Ari Aster produced, A24 distributed dark comedy starring Nicolas Cage, I had an inkling of what this movie might be. And it is exactly what I expected, but also somehow not. For me at least, the premise of this film was the main draw. It's a really simple concept, but also one that's just so bizarre. The idea that this random guy can suddenly start showing up in people's dreams around the world. How is this happening? Why is this happening? Why this guy? These are all questions that we as the audience ask, and many of the characters in the film ask, but they're not really the questions or the premise angle that the film focuses on. Instead, the primary focus is on the dream guy, Paul, and how this whole scenario affects him and his life. So the interesting premise pulls you in, but it's Nicolas Cage and his performance that keeps you there. Cage has long been known for his specific performance style, and the weird roles he often takes, and so again, expectations come into play here. And while we do get that classic chaotic Nick Caginess, much of the humor here comes from the fact that he's playing this mostly reserved put-upon guy. Paul is awkward and schlubby and whiny and pathetic and cringy, but it ends up working so well because of Nicolas Cage. I'm sure there are other actors that could have been funny in the role, but I don't think anybody besides Nick Cage could have delivered this unique blend of humor, creepiness, and pitiableness. Dream Scenario is one of those movies that you can enjoy or appreciate on two different levels. You could easily just go into this movie for entertainment and enjoy the surreal, absurdist humor of the premise, Nicolas Cage's performance, and the general weirdness of the whole thing. But the film does have an additional level to it, if you're looking for a bit more substance. You certainly don't have to dig very deep to see this level, because the film does very blatantly showcase its themes and cultural commentary. These thematic underpinnings are a bit broad, but the story examines fame, both the tumultuous, fleeting nature of it, but also the effect it has on the celebrity. It explores the idea of cancel culture and the court of public opinion, as well as groupthink, mob mentality, and how these things can all be used to blur the line between reality and fiction. Technology, advertising, and the commercialization and monetization of the subconscious even come into play here, with a very Twilight Zone Black Mirror flavor. There's no getting around it. Dream Scenario is an incredibly weird movie. Obviously not unexpectedly so, but it's something I think people should be mentally prepared for regardless. It'll be a draw for some, a repellent for others, and kind of just a quality that's there for everybody else. The weirdness and the film as a whole mostly works for me. It's a bit uneven with tone, pacing, and humor, following a very high and then low pattern, but perhaps it's meant to be a nod to the cyclic nature of fame. It's unfortunate that things kind of fizzle out in the third act, but when the story sticks the closest to its bizarro premise, it's remarkably entertaining. You'd think its one-joke nature would get old after a while, but that repeated concept was easily my favorite aspect of the film. Honestly, I might have liked this movie even more if it had just been an hour and 40 minutes of Nicolas Cage awkwardly walking through people's increasingly more bizarre dreams. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is definitely the premise. It's incredibly simple, and sounds like something a bunch of kids in high school would have dreamt up, but that's part of its charm. It's funny, because it's just an everyday guy showing up in all these dreams. But it's even funnier, because really, it's Nicolas Cage, so you can view it as this weirdo meta thing, too. The rest of the plot kind of ebbs and flows in terms of interest and humor, laying on the cultural commentary extra thick, but when the film focuses on the oddity of the dream scenarios, and the immediate within-film real-world reactions to them, it's fantastic. The second pro is Nicolas Cage. Now, I'm a fan of Nick Cage, and tend to always enjoy his performances, even within films I'm not the biggest fan of, so his inclusion in the pros here probably doesn't come as much of a surprise. But this isn't just a case of me liking him. He deserves to be in the pros here. This man is just game for anything. I mean, we've seen the string of films he's done over the years, and the entertaining, wild, and unhinged performances he often gives in those films. And so this movie is just perfect for him. He's able to be weird and funny and awkward, but also gives the whole thing this very unsettling quality. Really, he delivers exactly what this movie needs from him, and this is one of those films where I can't imagine anybody else playing the character. On the con side, the biggest issue is how uneven this film is. I realize that kind of sounds like a broad and dismissively non-specific criticism, but it's because the unevenness appears in so many different forms here. The story has a bit of a stop-and-start choppiness to it, which lends itself to some uneven pacing. The effectiveness of the humor sort of comes and goes throughout, and the tone's a little all over the place as well. That last aspect makes sense to a certain extent with the different dreams, but there's a big tonal shift that occurs partway through, which just feels out of sync with what came before. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Dream Scenario or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Dream Scenario 3.5 out of 5 paws. It's a wonderfully weird and surreal dark comedy. The premise is the real driver here, and things do lose a bit of steam when it strays away from its core concept, but Nicolas Cage always manages to pull it back together by coming completely unhinged. I would recommend Dream Scenario to people who like weird comedies. I know that kind of descriptor is sort of weird in itself, but if you're already a fan of that type of movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is a bizarre one. Surreal, absurd, strange, but it's got a simple enough premise and an entertaining enough performance by Nicolas Cage that it might appeal to a broader audience than usual for this type of film. If you liked Dream Scenario, I would recommend Being John Malkovich. This is another weird, kind of surreal fantasy comedy that's built around an unusual and memorable premise. That premise is almost a reversed version of what we see here in Dream Scenario, with people being able to climb through a portal to enter the mind of a fictionalized version of John Malkovich. If you want another weird and funny premise-based comedy starring Nicolas Cage, you should check out The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Cage plays a fictionalized version of himself, who gets caught up in a sting operation while meeting with a superfan. So while the plot is quite different, it features another strong Nicolas Cage performance and a story about fame that blends reality with fiction. And if you liked the darker, more uncomfortable or unsettling aspects of this movie, you might want to watch Beau is Afraid. It's another surrealist film with some comedic elements, this time directed by Ari Aster, who was the producer on Dream Scenario. It's a much darker film, but if you want something that's really out there, this could be the one for you. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Dream Scenario? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie about dreams? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information on this review, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.